Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to our webinar for Becoming an Anti-Racist Campus Virtual Symposium. It's been I want to say it's been a very full day, but it's really been a morning full of really amazingness. What is time, in these times? So welcome back to folks who were able to join us for our opening plenary and the concurrent sessions, and welcome for the first time for folks who are just joining us, maybe on a break or a lunch hour in the time that you are able to connect. My name is Elisa Diana Huerta. I use they, them, AA pronouns. I am a co-chair for the BAAC steering committee, and am excited to get to be the person to semi-host you in this virtual world. Just a few technical updates or logistical updates, I should say, for the session. We are providing live captioning. Thank you to the Aberdeen captioning team for that. In order to access them, there's a little CC button on the bottom menu of the Zoom window. You can either have them as subtitles or as a full transcript. There's also a URL for to be able to track the live streaming for that. The team that it just got dropped into the chat. There's also a participant folder if you haven't been with us all day that has the program and some helpful hints. That will also get dropped in the chat. In terms of questions, we're doing questions through the Q&A option tool on Zoom. So you can click the little two bubbles with a Q&A at the bottom. If you have any questions, those will come to the panelists and moderators, and we'll answer as we can. And I think those are the things. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out here or in any of the other Google Forms. We are monitoring those. So if you have any questions or comments, things that you'd like us to address in our time together, we'll be happy to do that. And we're here until about 1:30 this afternoon. This session is being recorded, and so that everybody knows. And I also don't want to forget to offer again my deepest gratitude on behalf of all the committee and all the folks that have been able to join us today, to the Berkeley Event Services team for hosting us and troubleshooting all the things that Zoom wants to challenge us in this day. So with that, I think I will pass it over to our facilitator for the session, Julie Schackford-Bradley.
Hi, everyone. My name is Julie Schackford-Bradley, and I'm the director of the Restorative Justice Center here on campus, and also a member of the Becoming an Anti-Racist Campus Steering Committee. And I want to thank everyone for joining our closing plenary of the symposium today. It's been an amazing day so far. I know it's getting close to lunchtime, and so please take care of yourselves as you need while you're here. And I also want to start by acknowledging the acute harms that are happening in the world today, right now, and to recognize how many of you who are here today are experiencing them. And I want to appreciate you all for being here, and especially for the panelists for showing up and taking on this work today in such difficult times. For the closing plenary, we're focusing on some examples of the grounded work and practice of anti-racism here on campus. So we have a variety of projects and approaches to present. And these projects are not meant to be seen as exhaustive or even fully realized in themselves or best practices, but really rather as works in progress and snapshots of the creative and intentional efforts of people who are dedicated to do what they can to engage in anti-racist practice. And I want to start by also saying that the plenary aligns with some of the goals of the steering committee, which is to develop an inventory of anti-racist practice here at UCB, and to generate discussion, which I heard a lot of today about what are the overlaps and differences between what a lot of people call DEIBJ work or diversity, equity, and inclusion work and anti-racist practice. We started with a survey on the BAAC, and then we also got some great information from a call for proposals that we did this past fall. And so we want to feature some of those projects that were that we sponsored in the proposals. And also just recognize the strategies and creative ideas that people in UNIS are developing to respond to critical campus needs in this area. So it's ultimately our goal to create more connections across campus so that people don't feel like they have to reinvent the wheel or that they're all alone in their efforts. And we hope this plenary session can demonstrate what is possible to inspire you and to shine a spotlight on potential resources and thought partners for you. So our plan today is to give each group or individual about 10 minutes to talk about what they're doing and what are some of the hopes and challenges of their work. And then at the end, we'll have time for questions and comments. And I see that the folks from the first group are here. So if it's okay, can we stick with the regular schedule? Lisa, Danielle, and Chrissy? Is that okay?
That sounds great.
Okay, I'm so glad that everyone could make it. So our first presentation spotlights the work of Lisa Ho, Danielle Cummings, and Chrissy Stachel. And their project is entitled Designing Data-Driven Anti-Racism Interventions. They describe their project this way. In this project, we seek to identify and heal past and ongoing harms and challenges underlying supervisor, supervisee, and workplace team interactions specific to racism, and aim to develop resources and to reinforce commitment to anti-racism in the work environment. Lisa Ho is an academic director of the Master of Information and Cybersecurity program at UC Berkeley School of Information and director of the Citizen Clinic Public Interest Cybersecurity Practicum. And Lisa is also active in campus diversity and anti-racism initiatives, including the Multicultural Education Program, where she's a facilitator, and she is the co-founder of the Dismantling Racism Study and Action Group for Justice, Liberation, and Belonging at Cal. And Dr. Danielle Cummings is the technical director for the Department of Defense, where she uses and teaches lean startup methodology to help teams create mission impact at speed. Her research in human-computer interaction focuses on the use of multimodal methods for increasing situational awareness. And she also serves as a lecturer for the iSchool's Masters in Cybersecurity program. And Dr. Chrissy Stachel is the founder and CEO of Reflecting Equity, a consulting company dedicated to helping communities foster inclusion and develop equitable policies and practices in their workplaces. And Chrissy earned her PhD in chemistry from UC Berkeley in 2020 and has been leading diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging efforts for more than 7 years. And so I will turn it over to you, Lisa, Danielle, and Chrissy.
Thank you, Julie. Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Ho, and I'll start us off with an introduction on the inspiration for this project and what we're trying to accomplish. So our Becoming an Anti-Racist Campus Supervisors and Teams project grew out of the work of the Dismantling Racism Study and Action Group, which you all may have heard about earlier in the staff networking section. In the Dismantling Racism group, we talk a lot about systemic racism and the need for systemic solutions. We also share a lot of personal stories about individual experiences on campus. What stood out to me was that in addition to the imperative to do systemic, campus-wide anti-racism action, also, in addition to that, regardless of any campus-wide initiatives, an employee's interactions with their immediate supervisor and their team have an overriding impact on their campus experience, regardless of what's happening in the initiatives in policy space. And so about a year ago, the Dismantling Racism group tried out an anti-racism learning and reflection tool for supervisors, which was developed by a UC leadership development training cohort. And it listed, if you can imagine, a series of anti-racism practices that group had deemed important for supervisors. And it also had a scale to rate adoption of each practice. Our informal trial of that tool pointed out how valuable it really would be to have a resource to help supervisors set practical goals for developing anti-racism practices themselves, especially if that resource was presented together with scaffolded guidance on how to move along that path of growth. So we submitted a proposal for the Becoming an Anti-Racist Campus grant to develop an intervention that could be adopted by a team, a supervisor with their staff, or by individuals. Or it could be adopted ideally by departments, by colleges, by the university as a whole, tying back to that importance of systemic solutions. Our staff ombudsperson, Sarah Thacker, planted the vision of a resource like this used as a systemic intervention campus or UC-wide. Just like we set professional development goals every year, imagine having everybody set an anti-racism goal every year. Having a practical tool to guide people in that would make that vision more realistic. So my colleague, Dr. Danielle Cummings, gave the push for our intervention to be guided by data rather than just our ideas about what might work. So we're starting from the beginning to validate what problems are important in our environment and what anti-racism practices are needed and impactful. So with that, I'll turn over the spotlight to my colleagues. First, Dr. Chrissy Stachel to talk about conducting assessment from her perspective as a former Berkeley PhD student and now an external consultant. And then to Dr. Danielle Cummings to talk about the challenges of trying to adopt an agile methodology in a research environment and the balance between collecting data to guide a targeted, impactful intervention and doing more generalizable research. And just before I hand over the mic, though, I'll mention for anyone interested in getting involved in our work, the surveys or focus groups or trials, please send me an email. I'm at lisaho@berkeley.edu. So with that, Chrissy, please go ahead.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Hi, everyone. So good to see so many familiar names and faces and be back in this Berkeley space. Thanks to Julie for organizing this. So yeah, I'm Chrissy. I use she, her pronouns, and I've been so thrilled to be part of this team working on this anti-racist campus effort and grant. And as Lisa mentioned, a lot of our inspiration came from really not having a joint or collaborative way to assess our anti-racism efforts, whether it's part of our team as whatever Berkeley community you're working in, or just as an individual. And so that kind of spurred our efforts in this way. We were asked to talk a little bit about the challenges we faced kind of moving through this project and some of the logistical barriers we've come up with. And it's been really interesting to kind of take this work as researcher in education space from my time as a PhD student to working externally on this project. And I love getting to see both sides of this. But one thing that we found is kind of getting through the logistical barriers of turning this into a research project that can really benefit the university and staff all over campus. So one of the things we wanted to talk about is how we're kind of navigating the space of bringing somebody on externally. So that's me as a consultant to really understand the dynamics of how staff work together to reach their anti-racism goal as professional development and otherwise. And so one logistical thing is just getting a research protocol started through the Office for Protection of Human Subjects and getting me involved and getting the people on campus involved and getting kind of, I guess, access to doing this research project. But that being said, we're super excited about moving forward and being able to do this as a research project. And Danielle's going to talk a little bit more about the logistics of that and why we're choosing to do this as a research project and how this will shape our goals moving forward. So excited to hand the mic over to her.
Hey, thanks everyone for having me today. So yeah, as Lisa and Chrissy mentioned, we're undertaking quite a, I would say, different approach to addressing the anti-racism concerns by attempting to bring in what I would call agile methods to a largely research environment. And the challenge in that is, when you're working in an organization where you have this traditional research approach, which, in my opinion, tends to take longer and require a lot more oversight. You have to practice a little bit of finesse in balancing the two goals, whether it's, we're focusing on collecting data for publication, or are we focusing on collecting data to make an impact today or in 2 weeks or a month from now? And while I don't think those goals, have to be mutually exclusive, I do believe that it requires some kind of intentional awareness on the part of the team in terms of the challenges that you could run into in pursuing both. So with that said, with the focus on kind of the lean methodology, we want to be able to use essentially the scientific method to make a hypothesis about the problem that we're trying to address, or the, whether or not the problem exists, or, we're making an assumption that there's room for improvement. And so constant and consistent customer engagement is kind of the key to validating that initial problem, or that initial task that we're trying to achieve, in the sense that, we don't approach the problem thinking that, okay, yeah, we may or may not have an anti-racist campus, but we do have a solution to fix it, right? Jumping into the solution space is definitely kind of getting the cart before the horse. So we want to, take a step back, engage with the target audience that we're hoping to learn more about, and also, get the kind of the baseline of the landscape from their perspective before we even begin talking about a solution. And so, as Lisa mentioned, the data-driven approach is largely collecting data from that target audience, and learning more about, their perception of, if there is a problem, what that looks like, and potentially, when things go well, what does that look like? What are those bright spots that we can use as a way to not reinvent the wheel, and also maintain what's working well, while at the same time improving those areas that need to be improved.
Awesome. Can I add one more thing? So okay. Awesome. So I guess going off of what Danielle said, our next steps are really to understand how folks could use this tool in practice. So how supervisors and their teams, or general employees in spaces at Berkeley, can bring on this kind of professional development tool, kind of like Achieve Together, but about anti-racist practices, and really understand the practicalities of it being used. And so, as Lisa mentioned, if you're interested in participating, the participation would probably look like a small interview or a focus group, and then potentially taking a small survey to help us refine the tool in a way that's most useful for you all. So yeah, does anyone want to add anything else before we finish?
Not here, thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Lisa, Danielle, and Chrissy, and thank you for that last tip that you added, that people can get in touch with you and join. That's really exciting and such good work. So. All right, next up, we're going to talk to Lucy Andrews and Ali Bhatti, and their project is called Redesigning SBUM, NST, and IB courses to be more anti-racist. And they describe their project this way: this past summer, faculty and graduate students in SBUM, NST, School of Ed, and IB redesigned 10 courses to embed anti-racist pedagogical principles and activities in each course. Lucy and Ali's presentation will discuss the project's origins, structure, outcomes, and lessons learned. And Lucy is a PhD candidate in environmental science policy and management, and also just happens to be the president of the Graduate Assembly this year. Alongside colleagues and co-conspirators, Lucy is working on projects to embed disability justice on campus, create safety that doesn't depend on cops, and reorient campus culture about the role of graduate students on campus so that they are actually viewed and respected as collaborators, peers, and experts. And Ali Bhatti is a graduate student from the School of Education. He's a PhD student in the SESAME, which stands for Sciences and Math Education program at UC Berkeley, where his research focuses on how we can make STEM education more inclusive, interpersonal, and interdisciplinary using bio-inspired design. He works with Professor Robert Full of the Integrative Biology Department on the HHMI Eyes Toward Tomorrow bio-inspired design program. And Ali loves sports and is frequently frustrated by his favorite teams, the Nets and the Mets and AC Milan. Thank you both for being here, and I'll turn it over to you.
Cool. Ali and I have decided to split the time, so I get to kick it off on our end. And every time, Ali, I hear your biography, it both makes me smile and blows me away. You do really cool work, and I'm so lucky to be your colleague in this. So I'm going to provide a little bit of history about where this course redesign process came from and some of the sort of political education work that has led to this activity. And then Ali's going to talk about, nuts and bolts, what we did, and also some evaluation ideas that ultimately he will be shepherding on all of our behalf. So I come at this work as a PhD candidate in ESPM in my 5th year. So I've been around for a minute in the department to see the ways in which my peers and I have become politicized, and a lot of the ways that graduate student advocacy, activism, and labor has led to anti-racist work in ESPM in coordination with some particular faculty allies. And so this past summer and leading into the fall, 10 courses in environmental science, policy, and management, ESPM, integrative biology, which is IB, and nutritional sciences and toxicology were redesigned to be more explicitly anti-racist educational environments, thinking about both structure and content. And as part of our effort, there were 2 components. The first was actually a summer learning community. So we weren't just redesigning courses, we were actually sort of building a collective understanding of what we were doing, some of the paradoxes, our sort of points of concern and contention, so that everybody was moving through this process together. And we met every couple of weeks to have discussions about what we understand anti-racism to be, how ideas about intersectionality feed in, particularly disability justice as an important component, and then thinking about pedagogy and positionality. How do we as instructors, with the identities and the lived experiences that we hold, teach students who may be similar to or may be different from us? And how do we do that in ways that are pedagogically really robust, knowing that ultimately we hope that our students are learning and feeling empowered in that process. With that learning community, we also had a bunch of graduate students, including me and Ali, who were paid, essentially a full GSR-ship to redesign the courses. And I don't want that to get lost. I think that in sort of a lot of our post-summer program reflections as a group, having graduate students devote significant time for reasonable income led to a lot of success. And so thinking about the roots of this project, they actually stretch back nearly a decade, recognizing that ESPM was a pretty politically engaged, large department. A lot of our sort of current organizing structure arose from a tenure denial case. I believe it was 2014, 2015, so a couple of years before I showed up, in which a Black professor, Carolyn Finney, the only Black professor in our department and one of 2 women of color at the time, was denied tenure. A move which graduate students understood to be both racist and a denial of the types of interdisciplinary and community engaged knowledge and work that she was producing. It was quite an uproar, and ultimately her tenure denial was never overturned. She now teaches elsewhere. We had a previous professor, an Indigenous woman named Kim Tallbear, leave Berkeley for similar concerns, namely that her scholarship, which was Indigenous and feminist, was not valued by senior peers who had done sort of traditionally STEM-oriented work. And this really activated and agitated the graduate student body. Then George Floyd was murdered by police in 2020, which again re-energized graduate students to ask our department to address both its racism and particularly its anti-Blackness in scholarship, in mentorship, in teaching, in admissions, in the many ways that our department doesn't serve nor welcome and actually harms students of color, particularly those with multiple oppressed identities. And so in the summer of 2020, ESPM grad students wrote a letter to our faculty colleagues saying, here are the things we see as problems and here are ideas for how to solve them. And out of that, one of many activities that came up was the creation of a course, a graduate seminar that graduate students were paid to create and then teach with a faculty sponsor as instructor of record to do all the paperwork, in which a bunch of graduate students and faculty enrolled together with the same expectations, namely that we would all be taking a class, that faculty would show up every week, that graduate students would show up every week, that it would be facilitated by graduate students, and we would learn about anti-racism work together. The course has now been repeated 3 times and is having a 2.0, like 201 version happening now. So something we'd be excited to talk about in a different venue. And out of that course, which was really about project work as praxis for learning anti-racism, the idea for a toolkit for faculty and for other instructors, lecturers, graduate students to inventory anti-racist dimensions of courses was born. So in collaboration with American Cultures, with folks in ESPM, and with the Center for Teaching and Learning, some people in SPM published a guide that you can go through. That's sort of a checklist of like, are you doing these things in your classroom to build an anti-racist space? And then what could you do if you're already doing some of the basic things? How could you push this further? And so in summer 2022, this past summer, a variety of graduate students and faculty took 10 classes, took this toolkit, inventoried the classes, and then made changes to be sort of more explicitly anti-racist in the classroom that made sense for the class. Many of the classes were traditional large STEM classes. You know, for example, Ali will probably talk about Bio 1B, which is a huge class that a lot of folks move through. There were sort of later in the undergraduate career ecology courses that were meant to serve 70 to 100 students. And then there were some social science oriented courses as well, thinking about things like climate justice. And so all told, the courses and their changes will impact thousands of students that move through these departments that were involved. In my work in the ecology class, for example, we rewrote syllabi to explicitly discuss anti-racism as an important part of the class, to embed colonial reckonings in the course, knowing that a lot of ecology has supported colonialism, talk about traditional ecological knowledge, build in methods of grading that are not punitive, that allow for a degree of flexibility and student empowerment in how they demonstrate expertise and mastery. And then ultimately redesigning a lot of materials to be accessible in a disability sense, like alt text on all the slides and that kind of thing. So that's an example of some of what was done. And at this point, Ali's thinking a lot about evaluation. And so I'll turn it over, Ali, to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Lucy. I will share my screen to go over a couple of slides here to talk about the evaluation that we're doing in this program and that we plan on doing. One of the things I want to highlight that's really, really important here is that this work is not just important, it's actually work that is translatable and also marketable in a way that will definitely be positive for anyone that's engaged in this type of transformative efforts within the university system. If you want proof of that, this work that we did in the summer was recently featured in the Chronicle for Higher Education here. I'll send out the link for this article as well. This is the teaching newsletter that's sent to thousands of people every week. Within the Chronicle, this was featured in the Daily Cal, which is shown here. We showed this on at the Berkeley College of Natural Resources website. And then, of course, we sent out the toolkit to you all. So just wanted to emphasize the fact this work matters, it's critical. And here's some sort of information that I'm going to add on about the evaluation to it. One of the things I want to mention is the fact that we're trying to take, much like the previous speakers were mentioning, a scientific approach to assessment here. And what I'm going to focus on is the fact that we're trying to develop and measure certain constructs within the space of anti-racism. Just to sort of theoretically ground this, this is within the framework that we reference here as the 4 building blocks framework, work by Mark Wilson and his BEAR assessment group within the Berkeley School of Education. And I'm going to focus very briefly on the fact that we're trying to develop a construct map that we can measure, that we can look at, that we can try to see, are any of the changes that we're making within these 10 courses impacting the way that we expect them to impact? What's happening here? Can we somehow, some way use a sort of scientific approach to sort of thinking, here's what we hypothesize, here's what's happened, let's use data to inform the decisions that are happening here. So to give you a brief overview, what we're trying to figure out first is a construct worth measuring. And here, what we just mean by construct is the fact that there's some sort of attribute we want to measure. And this could be in students, it could be in instructors, it could be in just general people. And examples that I've listed here, sort of on the ecology lens of things, since we're working really within SPM courses and natural sciences courses, are, for example, if you want to measure students' understanding of a concept like ecological succession within the term world of ecology, that could be an attribute, that could be a construct. You could also measure attitude towards something. Many of us have taken surveys with those Likert scales of strongly disagree to strongly agree. That could be something like objectivity in science, if you think of science as objective or subjective and something in between. You can also measure personality variables like environmental activism. And all of these are attributes that we will call this jargony term construct. And what we're trying to do in the evaluation assessment lens of this within the 10 courses that we've changed it is put it on a map. And here I'm showing you a construct map. This is basically a spectrum that shows you a level of degree to whatever construct you are measuring. So at the top here, we have a high level of whatever the construct is. And I'll show you some examples within the anti-racism context specifically. And then at the bottom, we have a lower level. And then of course we have in the middle. What we're trying to do is measure change. We're trying to see, for example, before courses, do students fall on this construct map, maybe at a lower level of some sort of understanding? And then after the transformed course, do they increase in their sophistication of some sort within this construct that we think is developing within them? And this is all, again, to ground our theoretical understanding of what we hope is changing within students. Overall, it's really important to recognize that this is a hypothesis, much like the previous presenters were mentioning. And we have to test it. We have to impose it sort of to this judgment of, what does the data show and what happens when we're having students go through these courses that we're trying to think are developing them in some sort of way within the anti-racism constructs that we're interested in. So critically in this process, you got to go into the literature and figure out what has been done already. There are many different types of constructs out there. There are many different things that people study and measure. But one of the things that's really important is to figure out, okay, what are possible constructs that are worth measuring within this, let's say, transformative 10-course change that we have? And then from there, what are the instruments that have been made? What are the items, the questions that people have asked students, that have asked instructors, all within this realm and lens of anti-racism? And then from there, once you have a good theoretical basis, a good grounding, a good literature review, you can then come up with several possible constructs to measure. And what's really amazing about this, and honestly also a little shocking, is the fact that overall within this context that we're in, undergraduate STEM education, there's little to no measurement of anti-racism constructs. This is a new, burgeoning, developing field that we are at the forefront of here at Berkeley, and we can be sort of the forerunners of this type of development, measurement that we're doing here within the transformative work that we're trying to establish within these different departments at Berkeley. So just to give you again, taking you from the theoretical to the real, hopefully, here's an example of a construct that could be just worth measuring, something just very general here. And this is what I'm calling just a big picture anti-racism construct. And I'm using the specific context of ecology because many of the courses were ecologically based and focused. But here we can imagine students somewhere on the spectrum, falling somewhere before the course and maybe changing somewhere after the course, or after a series of courses, or after going through the ESPM major. All of that is something in development that we're trying to figure out what is the scale of change that we're looking at. But you can see here at the bottom, we can imagine a neutral perspective of ecology. Ecology is objective. You can't have any sort of anti-racism components to it. Why are we politicizing science, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all the way up to an anti-racist perspective of ecology that involves actionable behaviors taken by students from an ecological lens of development. And then, of course, we have something in between. And this is something that we're hoping to develop and measure. And the way that we do this usually is by developing instruments like surveys, items, assessments of sort that we give to students pre and post an intervention. And again, all of which to connect back to our hypothesis of development within students. And then lastly, one of the things I'm really excited about is actually measuring this construct on the instructional side of things. We have to remember that when we're doing these changes to the courses, we have instructors leading the change. That was one of the benefits of this summer project that we had. We had instructors that very much wanted to improve their courses through an anti-racist lens using the toolkit that we referenced. So we can also possibly measure the instructional level of change that we see. For example, we can use work that's been done by folks like Ryan Ikeda and et al. About this idea of liberation, approaching liberation within anti-racist pedagogy. And this is, again, developed based off of the fact that we have a high level and a lower level, and it's sort of an in-between level. Overall, this is all to just say, again, and I'll stop sharing here, the possibilities are endless. They're ripe with opportunity, and it's worth taking a scientific approach here to measuring the possible changes that we hope are happening within students, sort of at the ground level here of the undergraduate STEM curriculum that's at Berkeley. And I'll shift it back over to Lucy for any concluding comments there.
I don't know that I have many, and I know we have to be brief, only that for me, this work is rooted in a real hope for the liberatory potential of education, and knowing that STEM has not manifested that predominantly at Berkeley to date, and that our students can be collaborators in the classroom rather than sort of subservient and that our work can trust them, that we can move into a classroom with trust. You trust the people and they become trustworthy, that our pedagogy doesn't need to be built on surveillance and punishment, monitoring students for poor behavior or grading them in ways that are meant to kind of break them down or weed them out. We don't have to do that. We can do it differently. And Ollie's trying to sort of support that work. And I'm excited to see his dissertation come out on this stuff.
Great. Thank you so much, Lucy and Ollie. And thanks for your deep dive into your vision and your process. Really super interesting. All right. So our next project is also about anti-racism pedagogy, featuring the work of Marisela Rodriguez and Victoria Robinson. Their project is entitled Assessing Anti-Racist Pedagogy at UC Berkeley, and they describe it this way. Our research project seeks to explore how both instructors and students conceptualize, employ, and are impacted by anti-racist pedagogy strategies in American cultures courses at UC Berkeley. Dr. Marisela Rodriguez is the Inclusive Teaching Lead at UC Berkeley's Center for Teaching and Learning. She leads CTL staff in supporting campus-wide initiatives related to diversity, equity, and inclusion by establishing and fostering partnerships with campus educators and resources units. Through campus partnerships and in collaboration with CTL colleagues, Marisela designs and assesses equitable and inclusive learning environments on campus. And she strives to advance strategies that de-center whiteness and position Black, Indigenous, and people of color voices and experiences at the forefront of teaching and learning. In her work as an educational developer, teacher, and researcher, Marisela seeks to explore ways in which educators can dismantle racist structures in higher ed. And Victoria Robinson is a continuing lecturer in the Department of Ethnic Studies and director of the American Cultures Center. Victoria's teaching and research focuses on abolitionist practices imagined and built across the borders of the university and community. In her role as director of the AC Center, Victoria works with faculty and academic partners to ferment curriculum development and courses centering anti-racism pedagogy aimed at liberatory futures. Thank you both for being here, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much. What an incredible wealth and richness in the room this whole day so far. Delighted to be in conversation, especially with my colleague Marisela. So the inspiration for this intervention is that the curriculum that is American Cultures celebrated its 30th anniversary last year, and its roots are in a desegregation, decolonial struggle that was built against the apartheid movement, the apartheid system in South Africa, and holding the university accountable to its investment in pension schemes in that apartheid system. It was actually a social movement that wasn't expected to be won. The organizers and the leaders at that time, and they were students who were organizing this work, they said they were just blown away by the fact that it was a movement that came together, and they then thought, how do we parlay that energy, that initiative, that excitement, that experimentation into the university itself? And so how do we desegregate the curriculum, desegregate the campus? And that curriculum focus is now a 30-year-old focus for the AC curriculum. And so Javon Lewis this morning talked about how racism is foundational and a foundational violence of our societies. And therefore, what is required of us is new world making. And that new world making in the curriculum came together with bringing the only campus graduation requirement for all UC Berkeley students into being in 1991. So the question that we have, Marisela and I, is that how does something forged from decoloniality, but taken up as multiculturalism, move through the hurdles of affirmative action, Proposition 187, 227, and all the movements against demographic shift, and the ways in which inclusion was being framed in higher education? How 30 years later is that curriculum sitting in the framework of anti-racism? And I would actually also personally note that it feels very incumbent on us at this moment in time to think about foundational structures in our institutions that have often been sidelined or wiped or washed out of the kinds of initiatives that were originary to their development in the flurry of excitement of our newness of initiatives currently. So there's also that kind of personal commitment to the foundational historicity of our campus's work. And I'll pass it over to Maricela. We're going to go backwards and forwards a little.
Thanks for that opening, Victoria. I really appreciated how you laid the kind of big picture of where we started, where we are now. And I'll speak a little bit more to the where we are now as we have these initiatives that are so important and powerful on campus happening and really ramping up. And Victoria and I found ourselves in conversation about, you know, what do some of these initiatives mean for educators, for students, for the human perspective? And we discovered through our conversation and our shared experiences of other conversations across campus that it seemed like not everyone was on the same page. And we really narrowed in on anti-racist pedagogy as one that seemed to be commonly conflated with other important ideas, but just different ideas like accessibility and inclusion. And we as a teaching and learning community, it became apparent to us, just didn't have a clear sense of what that pedagogical framework means, what it looks like, and really how it should be in service of our educators and students in the classroom, and what that impact continues to be even outside of the classroom. And I think that was so, beautifully summarized and sort of echoing what was said in the opening session by Jovan, Elisa, and Sunny, where they said we need to be able to name the thing in order to recognize it in the moment, identify the sources that might be perpetuating inequity or oppression so that we can change our behavior in institutions effectively and accurately. And if we can't name the thing, then we can't do anything else. Our work is essentially at a standstill. And so we wanted to, get a baseline understanding and exploration of what does anti-racist pedagogy mean and look like on this campus to both instructors and students. Because in the previous session, Ali named it very beautifully as well. There's not a lot of research or authentic measurements out there that capture anti-racism in education generally, the techniques that we try to employ. But also what's that impact on the student experience, on student learning? Through, our own research review, we looked at a couple of studies that did seem to position instructors at the center, and that's valuable, but those aren't the only experiences and voices in a teaching and learning space. So we wanted to really discover that and explore it for ourselves on this campus so that we can start to put forth important recommendations, which is that important momentum piece out of work like this, but also identify the need areas that instructors and students both continue to carry into these classroom spaces so that these types of pedagogical frameworks can thrive and that we can see the impact and that students and instructors can name that impact for themselves as well. And I'll just briefly, point out that strategies like inclusive teaching, culturally responsive teaching, those are important, but there is a growing research that says they are not enough or the only thing to close important equity gaps. And so what anti-racist pedagogy helps us do is encourage instructors and students to engage with the racist structures and oppressive institutions that we embody and are around us all day, every day. And we can critically interrogate those within a learning context. And that's when these equity gaps start to close. I'll pass it back to Victoria.
Thank you. And I think we have a unique opportunity with AC being positioned, one in its history, but also in its structure. It's the largest undergraduate curriculum at Berkeley and the only one designed with the intention and the structure of the AC requirement, which is comparative and integrative analysis of race at the center in the service of racial justice. And so that's a unique opportunity. But I also often say that AC is the minus canary of the institution, and particularly the undergraduate curriculum, because of the way in which it's positioned. It has coming into it a series of pressure points such as enrollment, such as the diversity of the student body from all corners of the campus being able to enroll in a single class. So it could be a sociology class with a public health major and an engineer sitting in that same space. So if we think about the diversity of demographic background and experiential relationships to the class and doing work around anti-racism, then we have this unique opportunity to think about anti-racism assessment in this way. We often also think about anti-racism and assessment as in, let's think about course content. Let's look at the pedagogy and the activities and the intentions and the interactions, and we put measurement scales around each. But Maricela and I are also thinking about what is the deliberative institutional structure, the place of tenure, the place of promotion, the place of teaching evaluation. Again, all pressure points on the way in which the classroom actually does show up. Budget planning. And to Maricela's prior point, the instructor is often the center of the analysis, which this will be part of our process of evaluation, but not the only. I would also name that in thinking through anti-racism as practice and pedagogy, there is a complexity which is beautiful, but also real in a hurdle of us doing this work, which is that anti-racism pedagogy often also involves liminality and opacity. The want to not be transparent, to not have relationships to the ways in which there is a gaze at the practices of interaction, of relationship building, what Indigenous scholars call a refusal. And if we take seriously that not everything can be known about how the classroom gets shaped around anti-racism work, how are those intentional but opaque places of the classroom, the network, the connections, available or not for evaluation? So that's something I've been thinking about. There's so much, Maricela and I said, how are we going to do this in 10 minutes? So I don't want to take too much time. Maricela, do you want to jump in again?
I'll just, for closing on my end, we were given these great prompts to be thinking about to make our presentations concise and to the point. And one of the prompts was, what have you found as a complexity? What's been the hardest thing? And we could name several, but one that kept, feeling very timely for me was that this work is not just contained to the classroom. It's not just contained to a single moment. That when our educators and our students experience traumatic events outside of the classroom, police brutality, hate crimes, COVID-19, all these events exacerbate the power dynamics that privilege some people over others. And so by continuing this work with anti-racist pedagogy, it's not just one single solution for a moment in time. It is something that can be long-lasting and have a huge impact on both students and instructors. Victoria, last word to you.
I'm really hoping that out of this exercise comes a lot of beauty. There's an abundance of experimentation that has been created over the last 30 years in this particular space. And to be honest, I just want to give voice and underline and highlight that effort and that labor that has been there, and hope that that comes in and integrates all of our learning in this large experiment right now, again, to Javon's terms of new world making.
All right, thanks so much, Victoria and Maricela. And I just appreciate so much how the AC courses really touch every student. And so this work that you're doing to make everything more intentional and to really look at the impacts of those courses, I think is wonderful, and appreciate it. All right, we're going to shift gears now and talk to Ramsey Bali of the Restorative Justice Center here at Berkeley. And this presentation focuses on how at the RJ Center, we work with individuals and communities to respond to racial harms on the interpersonal, cultural, and structural levels. And our purpose at the center is to bring people together and co-create spaces for addressing impacts, accountability taking, and engaging community commitment for repair and transformation. Ramsey is a Burkinabe American practitioner whose identities draw from a global spectrum of cultures, From a young age, his quest for peace and belonging were met by exclusionary identity-based dynamics that root in coloniality. This quest continues to drive Ramsey's work with conflict as an entry point for individual, collective, and systemic transformation aimed at facilitating healing and liberating outcomes. Ramsey began working with the Restorative Justice Center as a grad student, and he continues to connect with the RJC now as a facilitator, focusing especially on RJ for staff, faculty, and grad students. And I would also mention that he's joining us from Senegal. So I want to give appreciation to the tech spirits for making it possible for you to be here with us today. Ramsey, thanks so much. And I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Julie. Thank you for having me. Are you able to hear me clear?
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, it's so great to be here. So as you mentioned, I'm joining from Senegal, and we did have a couple power outages today. So in case I go off, just know that I'll try to join back ASAP. But yeah, very glad to be in the presence of you all and hearing the amazing work being done, and happy to add to that piece with, our own work that we do at the Restorative Justice Center, and speak a little bit to how we have engaged with restorative justice to address racial harms. So as Julie mentioned, really what the practice of restorative justice does is bring people together to engage in community, because the concepts and principles of community make the foundation of this practice. And it's important to acknowledge and recognize, again, for all those who do engage in this work, as we often remind ourselves frequently, is that this is an Indigenous practice that really builds on the Indigenous traditions and wisdoms of communities across the globe. So it is also important to recognize that there is a bit of an internal conflict and contradiction in applying these practices in various institutions and outside of the Indigenous context. And that being said, I think that as a practitioner myself, I take on the individual journey of bridging those gaps internally in order to cultivate my own ability to hold space for others when we're engaging around racial harms. And so the big value that restorative justice brings to racial conflicts when they do occur is it brings a rare opportunity for folks to really slow down and pause with what they're experiencing, and engage in conversation and self-reflection and the inner work about what happened. And so that's what we do when we come into space with folks. And this can be done, we are often called after harm has occurred and conflict has happened, but we also like to advocate for preventative work being done. And we do this through community building. And both of those involve kind of embodying what it means to slow down and getting to connect with folks at a deeper level than what is typically allowed for in the very rapid pace of modern day culture, work culture, and within academia as well. Because once those relationships are established and that rapport is built, when conflict does occur and harm does happen, because we very much operate from a place of acknowledging that that's a regular part of communities and engaging, we have a much wider point of reference to the individuals who might have caused the harm, right? Rather than what happens often is a person who causes harm gets reduced to just being that harm, and their whole beingness, their personality gets flattened to that experience. So in the frame of restorative justice, we really operate from the understanding that people are more than the harm that they cause, right? And acknowledging that the larger community and environments that we navigate have an important role, as folks have acknowledged, in shaping our understanding, our biases, being the water that we swim in. And so taking all those complexities into consideration and engaging in conversation that really acknowledges all of that is something that we're not often given space to, as folks who might be on the receiving end of experiencing harm or on the perpetuating end, right, of causing harm to others. And I myself have found myself to be in both positions. And so oftentimes what typically happens is responses to those tend to have a more punitive approach at the interpersonal level, where the harm that occurred, the action that occurred, gets weighed against some types of policies. And then we find the consequence to the action that feels appropriate, and we move forward without really taking care of the needs and the harms that resulted from the incident that did happen. And so that's where, again, the idea of slowing down and engaging really is what restorative justice brings to the space, and really centering, again, the needs that emerged from the harm that occurred. Understanding that both folks who were on the receiving end of harm and the folks who caused the harm might both have needs, right? And that the community in which they're navigating also has responsibilities in creating the circumstances that allowed that harm to happen. So ideally, in an ideal situation, all those parties would be involved in the conversation, right? But realistically, we can't. That's not a principle that can be immediately transplanted or embedded in modern culture. But it does provide us an important framework for engaging in these conversations. And in doing that, and kind of taking on this interpersonal conversation which can often lead to healing, because we're taking the time to unpack, and we're really guiding and helping folks to show up with their emotional self, right? Which is very different than how we're expected to show up in classroom or at work with our intellectual self. So making space for that, and wanting to also recognize that that's a really hard thing to do, because that's not something that we're invited to or allowed to do in many spaces. So it's also not something that folks are necessarily comfortable doing or automatically called to. And if you're not, that's also totally fine. But showing up with the emotional self, and then having this process of sharing and hearing each other, does provide, it helps me to need that does work towards the step of healing. And then it opens up space inside of us in order to be able to have a different perspective on what occurred, right? And so I'm speaking from personal experience as a facilitator and as someone who's been in these processes as well. That's really, and what that space also does is it opens space for internal reckoning around our relationship to the culture, our relationship to the institution, and really kind of can guide us through the process of unpacking how it is that we are conditioned by these various forces, right? And shaping our own behavior, our own biases, our default responses to certain things. And so I think this is something that applies to conflict even beyond the realm of being racial harms. But folks who are able to get the support or have the tools or the capacity to really work through conflicts can come out of that process feeling, closer to each other, or having grown and having learned. And so that's a very important aspect to the struggle, the anti-racist struggle for really bringing, I think, sustainability to the efforts and to the folks who are navigating this every day. Because so oftentimes people do get harmed and hurt, and it is just gets swept under the rug and it never gets addressed, and these things just build up over time. So just from a point of view of also well-being and sustainability for the movement, it does bring an important aspect. So it's I want to say that it's also so that's kind of the response to harm process, right? Where we bring folks to talk about what's going on. But what really, again, I want to go back to recognizing that restorative justice is an indigenous practice. This is just kind of, when we talk about restorative justice, it is only just kind of one aspect, right, of the very rich and wise indigenous culture and worldview and cosmology that has been brought into our modern day society and institutions, because it's been deemed to have worth in the current context. And it really still neglects and continues to perpetuate looking down on the cosmology that enabled this level of wisdom and these practices of which we currently benefit from. And so I say that because I think it's important. I think there's a lot of value in taking on the work of going deeper and understanding the fundamental beliefs, right, that actually created this very valuable tool for teaching us how to be in community and how to navigate conflict. And I think that's kind of a fundamental step in the anti-racist struggle, because racism and colonialism are at their root as well projects that were very anti-Indigenous. And so it's kind of how often we talk about the master's tools can't break the master's house. And at the fundamental deeper root of it, from my point of view and in my own journeys, in my own struggles, right, requires also a bit of a worldview shift and a paradigm shift at that level, right? How is it do we relate to each other? How is it do we relate to the work and relate to the harm that we experience every day? And so kind of in the spirit of sharing about this, I also want to make that invitation to folks. If you do engage in restorative justice, try to dig a little deeper into understanding what are really the philosophies and the values and the spirit behind this practice, and what does it look like for me to hold that in my day-to-day. And then it does really reveal a lot of things to let go of as well.
Thank you so much, Ramsey. That was beautifully said. In the interest of time, we'll move on. I would love to add, but I'm going to hold back for now. But yeah, thanks. All right, so our final presentation today features the work of David Maldonado, and also Victoria is going to be back with us, I think, as well, to talk about staff as students of the Staff as Students of Social Justice project. This evolving project aims to offer free and accessible educational opportunities for UCB staff on anti-racism. And in its current iteration, SSSJ offers opportunities to study material anti-racisms with David, and also attend lectures by American Cultures faculty and guest lecturers that will serve as thematic anchors and grounding points for the course. David Maldonado is a formerly incarcerated PhD candidate in the School of Education. He grew up in Berkeley and Oakland and is interested in refusing, unsettling, and troubling the logics of the university and the carceral state from an abolitionist autonomous sensibility. In his graduate work, he brings to bear an array of theoretical perspectives to address the historical moment of crisis in the university and the criminal justice system and hegemony itself, joining a cadre of abolitionist intellectuals and activists in efforts to study, plan, and organize. And we already introduced you, Victoria, earlier, so I will, without further ado, turn it over to you both.
Yeah, hi, thanks so much, Julie. Yeah, I mean, I'll try to keep it short and direct. Staff as Students of Social Justice, or SSSJ as we call it, really came out of a moment of crisis, right? The murder of George Floyd and activism in the streets. And I think we really came to a moment where we were like, let's not have another anti-racist workshop. Let's give staff the opportunity to audit AC courses, which is what the original iteration was. They were auditing AC courses, which were offered on Zoom, and some were even course capture. As that became less of a possibility over the last couple of years, again, I developed my own version of a course that kind of combines a lot of the AC topics, really around the idea that, and why it's called Material Anti-Racism and Carcerality, that to take anti-racism seriously, we need to also have a critique of power and of capitalism, and looking at the ways that surveillance and punishment work through those systems to maintain something like racial capitalism and its violence, right? It's a really novel experience, I think, for staff, because they got the ability, many have not been in the classroom for a long time, to be in the Zoom space and audit these great AC courses. That's no longer a possibility. So again, I developed my own course, really focusing on abolition and racial capitalism and the university. I don't think any structure is spared from critique, and it's a really safe space and a dynamic space. And I think staff really appreciate that. And I think, we're really excited about the next iteration of it, which is going to involve some of my academic heroes that I'm actually will be speaking with, including Ruth Wilson Gilmore, Joy James. I'll be giving another talk with Erica Miners. Dean Spade and Eric Stanley will be together, Dan Berger and Waldo Martin. I'm sure I'm leaving more people off. But we're really excited. We're collaborating with the MCC to give these series of speaker series, right? And then I'm going to refigure my course around it. So typically, staff would audit an AC course, and then we would come together and talk about maybe one reading that I would pick from those courses. Increasingly, as it became the course that I taught, we would pick one reading out of there, and then they would read the rest, right? And so, it's great because the speakers really come out of the same work. I've been using all their work in the class, and so this is a really great opportunity, I think, for staff to see them in person or on Zoom, right? And so it's more learning and thinking together through abolition theory and praxis, right? Thinking about modes of unfreedom, how things like white supremacy, heteropatriarchy, and racial capitalism operate in tandem, right? I think that sort of sums it up. Victoria, did you want to add something about the relationship with AC or something that I'm missing? I'm sure.
I'm not sure if this happened for everybody else, but Zoom just crashed for me. So I'm back. I didn't hear the end, but so there's also some structural provocations of this program and why it exists. So firstly, the idea that we've had many opportunities as staff on campus to participate in DEI trainings, but what does it mean to think about repositioning staff in the relationship through professional development to something that the faculty and students often really have access to, which is the political education of the classroom. So if we imagine anti-racism is also in its core DNA, a project of undoing hierarchy, which we know is also a project of undoing isolation. And isolation is often the tool of racism. It's creating cleavages and differences and pushing us aside from each other. What does it mean then to challenge that hierarchy by thinking about the classroom in different ways? And then another provocation has been that coming into that COVID moment, COVID epoch, there was an austerity logic that had been rooted on the campus and that was rerouted in some ways through the COVID ways in which education was getting delivered and to whom and in what select circumstances and under what condition. And so we also wanted to think about the abundance of opportunity that exists with the framing of AC courses and the intentionality of faculty coming into those spaces. David, I missed some of the last pieces that you said. So a couple of other things that we wanted to have happen for this is that we really did want that staff learning community. So the seminar that David has created and carefully crafted means that staff meet each other who would have probably never met each other. We have so many divisions, so many colleges, and then there was this intention to bring people together around their personal interest in anti-racism, and that therefore was forming a collectivity and a project of intentional care that we were really we were intentional about. And lastly, there is a materiality to this, which is that there's a notation on staff records that they've been in these spaces and done this work. And we're in negotiation and communication with supervisors to ensure that this work is sustained in recognition. Because again, a lot of this work that we do on our own terms, in our own time, also is contributing to the unevenness of how projects that are now proliferating around anti-racism are actually themselves sometimes reaffirming the status quo, not interrupting the status quo. David, anything, other things?
No, I mean, I think that sums it up. we're really excited again about continuing this program and about having this speaker series. I think it's going to be a really dynamic experience, right? And I just, personally, I love, every time I do one of these talks, I see someone that's been in the course. So it's great. Yeah. We're building community here.
All right. Well, thank you for being so concise. I know that we've moved into the time that we could have some Q&A. And I know there was one question that popped up around the schedule for these amazing events that you've just laid out. So I don't know if Elisa, did you have some answers on that? Not to catch you off.
I did. I answered it. There's actually, it's information is at the last section of the program. So if folks want to, this is the idea of the program is also to crowdsource. So if you go to one of the bit.lys there, the share resources, if you send it to us, we're going to continue to add things to the program. So it's kind of a living archive for us. If you scroll all the way down, you'll see the additional materials and opportunities for engagement, and you'll see the public lecture series. And I just put the first installment, which is going to be happening on March 8th at the MCC. And then there's links as well there. So you can go straight to, directly to the SSSJ page.
Great. Thank you. So we do have time for a couple of questions. I know there was a huge amount of material and great ideas that were all put forward. And so if anybody has anything they want to add or ask about, please feel free. I think I'm waiting to see them on this Q&A kind of card, right? As they come in. Well, while we're waiting, I wonder if anybody has, any of our panelists have any questions for each other or anything else that you'd like to add to what was said so far today. I know it's been a very long day for everyone. And so, yeah, I understand the silence.
I mean, I've got a question that I think anybody could step into, which is sometimes the work of anti-racism for me can feel heartbreaking because it requires coming close to harm, to grief, to legacies of trauma. And I'm curious to know, how do you sit with and move through and negotiate that? What keeps you coming back?
I think it's a great question, Lucy. You know what it reminded me of is a colleague when I was in graduate school that talked about doing archival work around stolen children. Children in Australia, and she talked about doing this really amazing work in the archive and being there. And then she shared about just being completely emotionally spent and like literally couldn't physically move for 2 or 3 months afterwards. Like we didn't know what was happening. It was all of a sudden, what are these things that are that was going on? And it was such a moment of sharing that, I think when folks were at her presentation, they thought she was going to talk about the archive, and she really talked about that, the impact of the work. And for me, it's such a pivotal moment in my learning about how disembodied I had been when I was in a history class, or even believing that my own people stopped existing at some point, like those kinds of history, like how deep it is. It was really this like moment. And then it invited in for me to think about how do we also resist like a mind-heart split, right? Mind-body split And that all of it is part of the work. And I think I shared that I confess that I have a PhD in anthropology for all the things, the complexities of that. But it also is a discipline. It's between social sciences and humanities, right? It's in this moment that I could actually talk about the effect of it in a way that was really important to me, and that actually helped me ground myself as a somebody with like a scholar or somebody with interests, whatever, right? But it's that moment that we don't account for. So I appreciate that question, because we have to start accounting for it, and not just accounting for it like it's going to fit into a spreadsheet in a timeline, a research timeline, but to know that that's part of it, and that's part of the work as we're like actually physically in whatever ways that we're doing it, engaging with this work, that it's not just information, because that's a very colonial, it's like to translate a human experience into a spreadsheet or a colonial role or those kinds of things, right, is in and of itself a racist structure. So then the ways that when we do research, all those things, we just see that it's everywhere. So I think part of it is for that, giving ourselves spaciousness. And we also have to shift the environment that we're in that can also understand that, right? So I think, I can't remember who was talking about it now, but talking about you were talking about it probably, about not understanding students in punitive terms. And that's, I think, something that has to shift at every level of this university, right? We're shifting conversations about probation, not talking about, probation with students, right? But we're still doing that with staff, so there's these different moments that we can see those kind of categorizations. I mean, that's just the top of my head after this day, but I think that we do have to, it has to be part of it at every place. When you're in a lab and you're doing research on, let's say, some medical intervention, you might have a very personal reason for that. And that, of course, is gonna be, your person is gonna be in your research. So it is those moments of spaciousness and capaciousness that we need to develop and nurture.
Thanks, Elisa. And relatedly, someone asked, how do you continue to engage in anti-racist work when you're tired? And I think a lot of what you covered there is helpful. And I think people coming together and supporting each other is definitely something that is super important. And letting someone else take over, if you have that person, to take over when you're tired. So having numbers of people, I think, is so important. Another question that came up is, oh, it just disappeared. Well, there was a question around, could some of the people on this panel or who are doing this work go out and do talks in other departments, maybe where they're not ready for that yet, or they're just starting to think about that. I mentioned at the beginning of this that we want to have an inventory so that we can help each other. So I think, yeah, even though that question is no longer there, I think that that's something that we can make available through the BAAC structure and other structures, or just personally reaching out to folks who are on this panel or who have spoken all day. All that information, like you said, Elisa, is in the is compilated in the
in the program.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I answered the question, so it moved to answered, so folks can see it. But we'll be doing I'll be doing also a quick survey for panelists and presenters to submit any of the materials that they are shareable, and any contact information that they'd like to share, and that'll be in the program.
Great. And I think we can add, if you want to say any more about it, Ramsey, some information about the philosophical foundations of restorative justice that you were referring to.
Sure, yeah. I was just typing a response here, so I'm not sure how that transfers and shows up in the chat for y'all. But one book that I wanted to share that really impacted me is called Restoring the Kinship Worldview by Darcia Narvaez and Wainpe Topa. So that they don't speak specifically to restorative justice, but that's more, again, if you're interested in learning the worldview that has informed the practice of restorative justice, that's ones that touched me. And on that note, I also do want to say that a lot of it has to be embodied practice in a sense. So for me, it's looked like it's been kind of my spiritual journey, right? Spiritual cultivation, and having the good fortune of learning under different elders and masters that have really kind of allowed me to make the steps that have been healing to me and progress on the journey. So reading is absolutely important, and education is, but it has to be complemented with that aspect as well.
Thank you. All right, well, it looks like all the questions are getting answered, so oh, I see the last question. Again, along the same lines, I find myself becoming more angry as the years go by, as I struggle with racism and my own devaluation in the workplace here at Cal. Might you have advice for how to deal with this? I don't want to be angry, but the struggle is real.
I come at this question as somebody who is disabled and sees this university continually dehumanizing disabled people. And I don't have an answer other than my only way is to sometimes disaffiliate from the university. I am in this place, but I am not of this place. The university is a site of labor, first and foremost, more than anything else, more than a site of education, more than a site of research. It is a site of labor. And the university, the boss, will never love you back. That is sort of the worldview that I hold about this place. And in that, I also have beautiful relationships with people I care deeply about and who have mentored me in incredible and uplifting ways. And so those things are true at the same time. But that's how I've made my peace here.
Thank you.
I'd like to share a little bit also, because I mean, it's such an important question, right? And I think everyone will have different answers. So thank you for asking that. I think for me, having communities in the struggle has been really supportive and giving me sustainability for this work, because it is just exhausting and energetically and emotionally. And I also think often about just the role of anger that plays, right? Because it can be something that's very destructive and paralyzing and disabilitating, but it can also kind of be channeled in other ways, right? An anger of hope, but that's not necessarily like, again, for me, community is and support is what's enabled me to be able to make that distinction. So just wanted to share that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'll share. Thank you all for the question and thank you for the responses. I think one of the things for me is thinking about that there's different qualities of tiredness and struggle. And the tired, for instance, to be very transparent, that I'm feeling right now for this work and helping to get this together is a good tired, right? For me, it's a good tired because this feels uplifting to me and connection, and in some ways just an opportunity to help create a vessel for us to talk to each other and be in virtual space together. But it's also exhausting. It's a different kind of exhaustion than a nonstop from email things that are happening because other people are in crisis. And for me, part of my strategy is to have a sense of what the textures are that are different and to know why, right? And it goes to go back to the conversation that Jovan was telling us in the morning was around what our core principles are and why this thing is happening. So if I'm feeling urgent because I'm getting emails coming in versus there's a critical response that needs to happen, if my nervous system is having the same response all the time, I've had to do some work to disaggregate those things. And I think that exactly that disaffiliation that you're talking about, Lucy, is not in it, but of it, and in good company, right? And so that there is still possibility here, even when it feels so impossible as an institution. And so I think that there's also good work in it. And also, like, not to diminish that I also really lucky that I get to spend my work time doing this work. You know, I get to be in spaces that are in those work, and also decided not to work in other parts of the university for these same reasons. Not because, and I think really resisting individually absorbing systemic harm, right? So resisting ideas around imposter syndrome. No, that's a system doing exactly what it needs to do. Resisting feelings that I'm not smart enough to be in a certain position or something like that. No, that's the system working. So it's having those resistance and pushbacks that have helped me build some resilience and capacity, and not resilience as in grit, like grit and bear it, aguantar, not that, but as in capacity for me to have some bounciness, to come back to myself and to find center again.
Thank you so much for that. I think those are final words, and really good ones. And then I think Alberto and Elisa will say some final words.
Alberto, you want to go first?
Yeah, I thought what you just said was poetry. That was pretty amazing. And again, thank you all for an amazing last session. It's been really resonating with me, and I've been so tempted to, share. And I really value everything that you've all have been sharing. And the whole day, so what I want to share with the audience, again, thank you for spending your day with us and for helping us in figuring out how we can help our campus community become the kind of anti-racist campus that can be truly inclusive, to achieve the kind of paradigm shift that we hope to achieve. It's clear that it's going to take a critical mass of staff, students, and faculty willing to engage in anti-racist world making. The BAAC will be doing work from now until the end of summer. At that point, we're set to write a report, and then the next iteration of the BAAC is going to be decided by the administration. The feedback that you all give us is absolutely important. It's absolutely critical for what happens. Again, I think one of the big themes that we've heard today was that at Berkeley, we're really at a fork in the road. There's a lot of anti-racist talk, but what matters is the anti-racist walk. And that's what we want to see happen on this campus. And the people that really make it happen are the people who showed up today. And but your ideas, that's what's going to be included in the work that we submit. So we'll have an evaluation. We've already been giving out some tools to get your feedback. Again, if the more input you can give us, the better. So thank you again for coming. And with that, Elisa.
I think that was very well said, Alberto. Thank you for being my letting me be your Thank you for all our accomplices and interlocutors and co-conspirators and advocates, all those things that came together today in this session and throughout the whole day, and all the long span of this work. Thank you to all the sponsors in all the various ways. And again, a special thanks to our Aberdeen captioning team, as well as the Berkeley Event Services team. And with that, check back with the program, maybe in a few days, give us a couple days to get that crowdsourcing done. And I'll just amplify one more time. We would love your feedback. Please submit your feedback forms. Thanks so much.